Okay, so today we're going to look at Competency 4 and what you need to learn to score proficient in this competency, which deals with cells, their organelles, and their functions, and reproduction. This is a big competency, and there are 14 questions on the state biology test from this section. So if we look at our PLDs, which you see right here, this tells us what we need to study in order to score proficient. The first thing is that we need to distinguish between the different types of cells that we have and their functions, and then also look at their organelles and how they move around. Then we're going to look at how they reproduce, which is the second part, and that includes mitosis and meiosis. We also have to learn the different levels of organization. So we're going to look at the difference between cells and tissues and organs and systems. And then finally, we're going to go over how vascular and non-vascular plants are, how their structures really are related to their survival. So the first thing we're going to do is just look at the two major types of cells that we have, and that includes prokaryotes and eukaryotes. So anything that is a prokaryote is what we commonly call bacteria, which means they're very simple organisms, they're single-celled, and they don't have a nucleus or any membrane-bound organelles. Where eukaryotic cells, on the other hand, they have a nucleus, they have lots of organelles, and they're just a lot more complex. And so that means that all protists are eukaryotes, all plant cells are eukaryotes, all fungal cells and animal cells are eukaryotes. And so that's kind of what we have over here in this diagram. So if we look, more specifically at a prokaryote, you're going to notice that, again, this is a bacteria, and it's very simple, and it's going to have DNA, but it's not going to be inside of a nucleus. So here's the DNA here, and you can see it's just really in the middle of this cell. We do have cell walls, cell membranes, cytoplasm. We also even have ribosomes because remember, they make the proteins for us. So bacteria have to have that. They also have these structures here that resemble cilia. They're usually called pili in bacteria. And then many bacteria have this flagella here that helps them to move around. And you can see it just kind of looks like a tail. So again, this is a bacteria and it's a prokaryote. Over here we have a protist, which is the most simple eukaryote that we have. And many people confuse the protist with the bacteria. And really the best way to distinguish between the two is just to look at the inside. And so here you can see that you have more structures. Even though the nucleus is not labeled, you can see that they're really just more circles and things going on inside this cell. And so that's going to make it more complex than our bacteria. And then again, you see here that this prokaryote has cilia, which are these little hairs on the outside that it uses to move around. So if we go back and we look at the plant and animal cells, remember they're also eukaryotic cells, and you can again see all the structures that they have on the inside, which means that those are organelles. We're not going to see those in prokaryotes, only eukaryotes. And if we look at the differences in plant and animal cells, remember that plant cells are the only ones that will have chloroplast and a cell wall. They also, plants meaning, also have a large vacuole, which is going to store all of their water and nutrients. And then animal cells are the only ones that have centrioles. So make sure that you understand the difference first between prokaryotes, which are bacteria, and eukaryotes, which are our protist, fungus, plant, and animal cells. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to look at is the second descriptor. We're going to look at the types of reproduction that our cells are going to use. Okay, and so on the way to that, you can see that we have some diagrams of our organelles, and you will need to go back through and memorize these functions of the organelles. But just moving on, we're going to look at how our cells reproduce, and we know that there are two processes. So it will either be using mitosis or meiosis. So when we think about mitosis, I kind of drag the word out and I think about my toe. And so a toe is a body part. And so when we're looking at mitosis, we're looking at cells that are making up normal parts of our body, and we're just making new cells when we need them. Meiosis, we're looking at a process that makes cells that make me. And so if you think about me or you, we were made from an egg and a sperm, and that's the process that we're going to use there. And it's really important that you learn these diagrams. So with mitosis, you can see that we start with a diploid cell, which means that you have a full set of chromosomes. And for us, that means it's a cell that has 46 chromosomes. And then that cell divides, and we get two new cells that also have 46 chromosomes. So that tells you that everything in this cell replicated or duplicated before it split in half here. Now, over here with meiosis, it's a totally different story. So we'll start with a diploid cell. We divide it, you can see, into two more diploid cells, and that's through meiosis 1. And then each of those cells will divide again, and you see that we end up with 4 cells that have 23 chromosomes, which is half of what we started with. Because if we're looking at the combination of an egg and a sperm, we want our egg to have 23 chromosomes, and we want our sperm to have 23 chromosomes, so that we get that magic number of 46. So down here, we have just a diagram that shows us the phases of this. So this first diagram is looking at mitosis, which is what we had up here. So remember, mitosis, we're making body cells like in your toes. And we see that we begin with what we call interphase. And interphase has 3 phases, G1, S, and G2. S is the important one because this is where we're going to double the number of chromosomes that we have. Because if we go back up here, if we start with 46, one cell that has 46, and we end with 2 cells that have 46, that means that somewhere along the way, we had to add more chromosomes. And so that's what happened here in S phase. And then after interphase is over, then we just move through prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. And you can see here what's going on in those different stages. Remember, prophase, we're just kind of getting ready to line up. Metaphase, we line up in the middle. And then anaphase, we pull apart. And telophase, we finally are getting ready to split. So down here, we have meiosis, which is the process that makes new sex cells. And so that's the process that makes the cells that make up me. And you can see that we have 2 different divisions. We have meiosis 1 and meiosis 2. And so that's how we're going to divide down. If you kind of go back up here, so meiosis 1 made these 2 cells, and meiosis 2 made the 4 that you see below. So we're dividing that number of chromosomes in half here. The most important thing about meiosis that you need to remember is what happens in prophase 1. That's when we have crossing over. And so in this picture here, you can kind of see that these two chromosomes that are beside each other, they're kind of crossing their legs over each other. And you can see that a little bit of the red gets on the orange chromosome and a little bit of the orange gets on the red chromosome. And that's just going to help to mix up the genes. It's going to really explain why you and your brothers and sisters look kind of alike, but not completely alike, because every single egg or sperm that a person makes is going to be different. And this is one of the reasons why that it's going to be different. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to look at is organization. So this is the next descriptor that we need to talk about. And so that explains the difference between an individual cell and a tissue and an organ and a system. So a cell is it's literally just one cell. And so it could be like we have here, one epithelial cell, which it could be something like just one skin cell, because epithelial tissues are coverings and linings. And so this could just be one skin cell. If you put a whole bunch of these cells together, you're going to get a tissue. And you can see how every single cell in this picture looks alike. So when you see groups of cells, that's going to be kind of a key that you're going to look at a tissue. And the same thing down here. We have one smooth muscle cell, and then we have a lot. Now, excuse this particular picture. This label says it's epithelial tissue. It is technically muscle tissue, but I think you kind of get the picture from that. Then, when we move on up, if we put like tissues together or put different types of tissues together, actually, we get something called the organ. So the stomach is going to have more than epithelial tissue, because your stomach has some muscle tissue too, and that's why it contracts, and that's what makes your stomach growl, when you get hungry and whatnot. And then the same thing down here. So organs have multiple tissues, and then systems have multiple organs. So here you can see that in this digestive system, we have the stomach and the small intestine and the large intestine and the liver and the esophagus. So just make sure that you can distinguish between these different parts. And don't forget that this applies to plants as well. So we can, look at an individual plant cell. And then, of course, here's one just pointed out here. And then we move up to the level of tissues. And so we've talked a lot this year about vascular tissues and non-vascular tissues. And so if we look at vascular tissues like xylem and phloem, so we've got groups of similar cells that are working at the same function. Then we move up to an organ, and on a plant, an organ is going to be a leaf, or it could be a stem, or it could be a flower, or it could even be a root. So when I think about organs, I think about a single structure that functions as one thing. And then when you put all that stuff together, you get systems. So we have what we have here is just a shoot system that is the stem and the leaf, because that's everything that's above the ground. So plants and animals both will, will exhibit these different levels of organization. The last thing that we need to talk about is survival. And when you think about what you need to survive, it really boils down to energy. And I've been telling my class all year that if you lose the ability to make energy for yourself, then that's what causes you to die. And so we can all think of, a million different ways that organisms can die. And in this particular case, we have to consider plants. So, what do plants need to make energy? And so, if you think about it, energy production is dependent on food. So plants, since they don't have mouths and whatnot, but I know Venus flytraps have a mouth, but we're talking about just regular plants because even Venus flytraps are going to do photosynthesis. So a plant has to use photosynthesis to make its food, and the main source of energy for anything is going to be sugar. So, in order to make this sugar or food, a plant is going to need three ingredients. It's going to need sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water. And so, these are the three main things that you need. And so, let's think about where these things come in. And so, chlorophyll is the pigment that's inside of the chloroplast that captures the sunlight for us. So that's the first ingredient. The carbon dioxide comes in through the stomata in the leaves. And the stomata, they're just little teeny tiny openings on the bottom sides of the leaves. I'll go over here real quick and Google one for you just so you can see what it looks like. They kind of look like little eyeballs on the bottom sides of the leaves. So here they come. So you can see, in any of these pictures, these are going to be on the bottoms of our leaves, and they're going to open and close and allow our carbon dioxide to come in. And of course, then our byproduct oxygen is going to go out of those as well. So that's how that comes in. And then water is going to come in through the roots. So, anytime you're watering plants outside, you always point the water hose at the roots. And then that's how that's going to come in. And it's going to be transported through the xylem, which I'll show you a picture of in just a second. So then, once we get the sugar or the food, then we've got to turn the food into energy. And so remember, your energy is for any living thing is always going to be ATP, and it's going to be made during cellular respiration. So the sugar, we just made it, it's already in the plant cell, so we're good there. The oxygen, really it's kind of weird to think that plants need oxygen, but they need just a teeny tiny amount of oxygen, and we made that during photosynthesis too. So most of the oxygen that's made during photosynthesis is released because photosynthesis makes so much, but just a teeny tiny amount is used for making the plant's energy. And so once you have those two things, the plant can turn around and make its energy, which of course that's going to go on in the mitochondria. And once the plant gets the energy, then it can grow, it can reproduce, it can do all those things that it needs to. So just remember that survival always boils down to energy, and you've got to think about where it comes from. So for animals, energy is going to come from food that we eat. And for plants, it's going to come from photosynthesis. Down here, I have a couple of pictures of xylem and phloem. So when you think about water, water is transported by xylem, and this is a cross section of a root. And so the xylem is in the middle, the phloem is on the outside. Phloem transports our sugars. This is a cross section of a stem, and you can see again, xylem is on the inside, phloem is on the outside. So when I think about this, I think about the most important thing is in the middle, and so water is most important, so that's why the xylem is in the middle. These are, of course, housed within the leaf, so it's inside the middle of the leaf. This is just another picture of the xylem and the phloem, and both of them literally are like little tubes that run all the way through the plant. So, if you go outside and you pick, some flowers, like if you pick a daffodil or something like that, if you look at the stem after you pick it, you can sometimes see little tubes. Or think about celery. Remember when we did the celery experiment? And if you break celery in half, you can see the little circles in the ends. That's what we're looking at. We're looking at the xylem and the phloem. And of course, xylem is going to transport water up because water's coming in through the roots, so it's always got to go up. And then phloem is going to transport the sugars up and down because the sugars are going to be made in the leaves, and so we're going to need to take them up to the top and down to the bottom of those plants. Okay, so this concludes Competency 4 review. If you have any further questions, just feel free to ask. And these videos will be available to you through your modules, your review modules that you'll see in Canvas.